Ontology is the study of how things exist, not what exists. That's a common mistake. I'm not the object police. I'm not trying to tell you that there are 20 million things or one thing or three things or whatever. I'm simply saying that if something exists, say for example a sentence, if sentences are real and sentences exist, then they exist in the same way as spoons. And how do they exist in the same way? They exist in the way that they have a kind of gap between what they are and how they appear, and this gap is irreducible and transcendental, but nevertheless the appearing and the being of the thing are kind of inextricably welded together, right? This is a very, very helpful, if you like, kind of a detour that I took through something seemingly apolitical to get back to how to think something political. The point being that, you know, rethinking politics is precisely what is required right now if we're going to be including non-human beings in the equation. And in order to include non-human beings in the equation in a full-on way, you do need to address quite deep questions about what the word exist actually means. When you hear the word object, you tend to imagine in your mind the worst possible thing that could happen to a human being, aka the dreaded objectification. And so the notion of object-oriented ontology is very provocative because it suggests that we think that everything is reducible to objectified stuff. That's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to say. What we're actually trying to say is that since the notion of person is actually quite cheap, since it's impossible to distinguish myself between you know, being me as a person and me as an android, let's say, for example, you know, Descartes sort of right? Like a default mode of being a person is being paranoid that I might not be a person. Since that's impossible, therefore, it's not possible to maintain a distinction between humans as people and non-humans as people. And since we've already gotten rid of the idea that life and non-life are thinly, rigidly bounded and separated from each other, we might as well include ashtrays and pillows and walls and spoons in the mix as well. So one ends up sounding a little bit like some kind of goofy Yoda type of a character. And what I'm essentially saying to Marx a little bit in the book is that, or at least to Marxism, is that for sure you can have it. Absolutely go right ahead. You just have to include hedgehogs and you have to sound a little bit like Yoda. If you're okay with that, then by all means, you know, keep it. And actually, I'm okay with it. And so, yeah, ontological questions are deeply political. Just ask someone engaged in a struggle such as the water protectors in northern USA, indigenous people protesting the oil corporations, right? Like, there's an ontological war going on there between, you know, whose reality is more accurate, actually. Neoliberalism has created a kind of paper-thin Weimar Republic-like situation everywhere. And through this horrible paper-thin situation, people can glimpse the paper-thin biosphere that's paper-thin also for exactly the same reason. That's very scary. And one reaction to that could be fascism. And in fact, you wouldn't believe how many fascist movements in America tie themselves to hostility to Agenda 21, which is a certain part of the Earth Summit of the United Nations in Rio. And Agenda 21 says stuff about sustainability there, and it says stuff about biodiversity. It's the biodiversity bit that they're going against. So they've, in a way, in a kind of perverse upside-down way, the extreme right has made this connection, you know, that actually there is indeed a link between speciesism and racism. Racism is the thing that's structuring speciesism, so the struggle against racism is in fact an ecological struggle quite deeply, and so the struggle against fascism is definitely an ecological struggle very profoundly, and so ultimately we want our ball back, guys.